Die. Take this. Make sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any exciting videos. This has to be the most overpowered protagonist I've ever seen. Our main character starts with a cheat-like power to instantly kill, and no one can resist his 2 words. What's more, besides being able to instantly kill, others aren't even allowed to bear ill will towards him, or they'll die on the spot. The craziest part is he had this ability even in his old world. His entire old world bowed down, just hoping this great Buddha would leave them alone. Little did they know that today, a sage summoned our protagonist to another world. More accurately, his entire class was transported here. She called herself a sage, and when the teacher tried to interrupt, she casually dealt with him using magic, leaving no one daring to utter another word. On that note, Shin also warned them not to do anything unnecessary. While she didn't intend to harm anyone, if they angered her, that would be a different story. You see, her power level was 530,000. Sensing the atmosphere had become a bit tense, she casually killed the bus driver too. Afterwards, she calmly said she just slipped up. Immediately after, she announced this was in another world, and they were summoned here as sage candidates. This world was originally ruled by sages, but occasionally new personnel were needed. With a flick of her hand, she revealed that some among them were exceptions, including the protagonist. There were for such people. Yet, our protagonist was still sound asleep. Shin explained that she had granted everyone a system called Divine Blessing. Within it, they could view their own status. At this moment, everyone received different abilities. But just then, one of the exceptions spoke up. The girl named Tamachika said she saw nothing. Shin's reply, however, was incredibly cold. Because sometimes, some people aren't compatible with the system. She advised Tomo it was best to leave on her own. If she couldn't become a sage, she could consider being food. After saying that, she paid no more attention to Tomo. She declared their first mission would begin in 1 hour. During that time, they should think about how to survive. Just as Tomo felt dejected, those around her discovered the mission on the system. It turned out that in an hour, a level 1000 wyvern would arrive. Currently, they were safe thanks to a protective barrier. As everyone panicked, Class President Sasaki activated his command ability. He ordered everyone to report their abilities. Yazaki reassured the class that there was no other way but to overcome this mission. With the class president taking the lead, everyone reported their abilities one by one. In just 2.5 minutes, they had a plan and began to exit the bus, completely ignoring the 4 people who weren't glowing earlier. Ironically, the 4 of them had no idea what the plan was. What left Tomo stunned the most was that one person was still sleeping. She tried to wake him but failed. At the same time, the other 2 in the group couldn't sit still anymore. Just as they were about to follow suit and get off the bus, the class president blocked them. He declared that none of the 4 were allowed to leave the bus. The blonde boy was about to erupt in anger, but in the next second, he was taken aback. The class president casually lifted the chair next to him. It turned out that as long as one received the system's blessing, even at level 1, their body would be enhanced. That's why, in their eyes, these 4 were just useless weaklings. In short, the reason they weren't allowed out was to turn them into bait for the wyvern. That way, the others would have time to escape. With that, he signaled the girl behind him with his eyes, the one with the ability to increase others' attractiveness. In normal situations, this might not be a bad ability, but its other amazing use was to draw aggro. The 4 of them had no way out, completely unaware they were being thoroughly exploited. Seeing the class president's coldness, Tomo immediately questioned the plan, asking if it had everyone's consent. First off, his best friend would definitely never agree. However, as the question was posed, his best friend's expression said it all. The answer, of course, was yes. Next, after the bus door was locked, the blonde boy tried to break the window to escape. Unexpectedly, an hour had already passed. By the time they realized it, it was too late. First, one of the girls among them was taken care of. Then the blonde boy's turn. What the hell? It was at this very moment that our protagonist woke up. As soon as he awoke, he saw Tomo in utter panic. He was completely bewildered, not understanding what the hell was going on. But a loud thud on the window caught his attention. Looking up, he realized a wyvern was circling right outside. The protagonist was about to observe more when the opponent suddenly swooped down. Though he didn't know what was happening, the situation gave him no time to think further. Oh no, we're done for. Only when Tomo dared to open her eyes again did she realize they both seemed to have been saved. She wanted to ask the protagonist what had just happened, but he was about to ask her the same thing. He was also very curious why the wyvern had suddenly died for no reason. This left Tomo a bit confused, but overall, the result was that they were both saved. Next, she summarized everything that had happened for the protagonist. After connecting the dots, the protagonist decided to go outside. If the sage had said there was only one wyvern, that meant it was safe outside now. However, before the protagonist could observe his surroundings, Tomo suddenly saw 3 figures in the sky. The newcomers were their classmates. You can see them from this distance. Alright, let's take care of them. When I saw our old classmates soaring through the sky, yet they heartlessly abandoned us here. That action was no different from murder. But that was exactly what the protagonist really wanted to say. While Tomo was silently contemplating, the 3 people in the sky had also flown down. Discovering the wyvern was dead and Tomo was still alive, especially the latter, the chubby friend was utterly astonished. You see, he had originally intended to turn Tomo's body into a living corpse and then do whatever he wanted with it. The thing was, his group had a necromancer. Seeing the less than friendly appearance of the 3, Tomo was about to whisper something to the protagonist, but the guy in the middle couldn't hold back anymore. In the very next second, he angrily unleashed a powerful magic orb. It grazed past Tomo, its power truly terrifying. It turned out this handsome friend's ability was hero. Although he could only use basic magic, he had practiced this move constantly. This constant practice caught the protagonist's attention. Clearly, only an hour had passed. No time for much thought. The other guy now ordered Tomo to come to his side. Initially, Tomo didn't understand why, but she immediately grasped everything. It turned out these three were after her body. The protagonist couldn't believe Tomo had only just realized it. He decided to try persuading all three to talk peacefully first. After saying that, he pointed at the handsome guy. When the other fell, the chubby friend immediately understood his predicament. At the same time, our protagonist very kindly explained his ability. He stated his ability was to make any target die on the spot. Hearing that, the chubby friend was stunned. Wait, why isn't it working? So, when the protagonist asked if he wanted to try it once, the chubby friend couldn't help but hesitate. But that was just an act. His real goal was to slowly get close to the protagonist and then strike by surprise. However, what he didn't expect was that he couldn't even take 2 steps before the protagonist ordered him to stop. It turned out the protagonist had another ability, to sense others' killing intent. And when combining both abilities, anyone with killing intent towards him would die. The chubby guy was utterly dumbfounded after hearing that. On the other hand, the protagonist also recalled his earlier suspicion. He felt these three seemed to have trained here for a very long time. And indeed, that was the case. It turned out the chubby friend and the other two weren't new to this world. Not long ago, to defeat the demon lord, they had been summoned by another kingdom. But upon hearing this, the protagonist told him to stop. To put it simply, they had been adventuring here for a year. The moment the demon lord was defeated, they were thrown back to their old world. The problem, though, was that the three of them had been absent from school for too long. Fortunately, the chubby friend directly stated the answer. 1 year in the other world was only equivalent to 1 hour in their normal world. This also meant they still had a chance to return to their world. After understanding, the protagonist immediately intended to finish off the chubby friend. He didn't want to leave any future threats. At the crucial moment, the chubby friend frantically begged Tomo for help. But of course, she didn't care about him at all. She owed her life to the protagonist, and because of that, she felt she had no right to say anything more. This girl doesn't seem to be the gentle type after all. Seeing this, the chubby friend quickly played his trump card. If one wore the bracelet on his wrist, that person would be unable to resist the commands of the first person they saw. This also meant that with this item, the protagonist could be completely at ease. He immediately decided he would become Tomo's slave, but ironically, Tomo didn't want him at all. This bracelet was like the golden fillet. If Tomo didn't want him, the chubby guy couldn't get close. But continuing like this wasn't a solution either. Tomo asked the chubby guy if there was a way to not be his master. He originally didn't intend to speak, but couldn't defy his master's command. He then said that as long as she spoke, the master's rights could be transferred. So Tomo immediately transferred the chubby guy to the protagonist. The first thing the protagonist did after the ownership transfer was to order the chubby guy into the forest to await orders, while also leaving behind all his valuables. Though the chubby guy was 1,000,000 times unwilling, he couldn't refuse his master's command. After sending the chubby guy off, Tomo suddenly became quite shy. You see, she and the protagonist had almost never spoken to each other before. Why was he trying so hard to protect her now? Well, the protagonist didn't know why either. His thoughtful expression immediately made Tomo hopeful. Just as she thought she was about to hear the answer she longed for, he said, "When you fell into my arms, it felt pretty soft." Oh my god, how annoying. At the same time, the sage also received a report from her subordinate. Knowing that 4 people had died, she initially thought the class's final action was just as she predicted. The result was a sacrifice of 4 powerless individuals. But when she learned that among the dead were S-rank ability users, and the wyvern also died inexplicably, for a moment she was truly shocked. However, that shock was only fleeting. She decided this wasn't something worth bothering about. She simply ordered her subordinate to pay a little more attention. Just do as you wish. This is the most domineering and least saintly protagonist I've ever seen. He just needs to say die, and others instantly drop dead. The key is, no matter how beautiful his opponent, in his eyes, they're just a skeleton. Anyone who provokes him will die. Not only can he instantly kill, but he can even delay death. Once he targets someone, running to the ends of the earth will only lead to one path, death. The thing is, just a moment ago, since only he and Tomo didn't receive the system, the 2 of them were abandoned by their classmates, shortly after being transported to the other world and had to explore on their own. As they were wondering where to find information, the other party recognized them as sage candidates with just a glance. The cat-eared girl made no secret of her intentions, especially finding young men like the protagonist even more valuable. They had both potential and were easily conquerable. Just as Tomo thought the cat-eared girl had fallen for the protagonist, the other party unexpectedly changed the subject, saying she had no intention of doing anything to people who already had girlfriends. Simply put, this was just a way to use the excuse of help to invest early in the 2 of them. But no matter what, with such a guide leading the way, how could the protagonist refuse? In a flash, a day had passed. Only when she came to her senses did Tomo realize she had unconsciously bought many things. But what she didn't expect was that at this very moment, a group of thieves had surrounded her. and the mastermind behind it all was none other than the cat-eared girl from earlier. Her friendly demeanor was merely a disguise. It turned out that sage candidates weren't some rare thing in this land. On the contrary, they were infamous as harbingers of disaster. So, they acted wildly and recklessly just because they had the system. Therefore, capturing the protagonist would not only help them vent their stress, but also fetch a hefty price. But from the protagonist's perspective, there was only one conclusion. If that's the case, then perhaps a massacre wouldn't be so bad, would it? This statement immediately made the whole group burst into laughter. As this group was about to make their move, half of them died. It turned out the protagonist was testing his ability. He wanted to see if he could make only a specific part of the body die. The results showed it was completely useless. Everyone still died instantly. Witnessing this scene, the cat-eared girl was utterly distraught. She frantically begged, saying her siblings were waiting for her to return home. But ironically, the protagonist wasn't swayed by this tactic at all. Even so, it wasn't a reason for her to become a thief. With that, he once again pointed forward. But surprisingly, there was loud thunder but no rain. Though it was unclear what happened, this hesitation gave them a chance to escape. Just as Tomo thought the protagonist had spared their lives, he said, "I didn't let them escape." What? See you next time for the whole family video, folks. It turned out the protagonist could not only instantly kill others, but also create a delayed death effect. Just as they were about to leave, a group of guards suddenly ordered them to stop, demanding an explanation for the recent situation. The protagonist intended to lie his way out, saying he had just been passing by. But the female guard named Omachi didn't believe that wild story. She had clearly witnessed the thieves who intended to attack the protagonist suddenly collapsing. Knowing that they saw it, but didn't come to help earlier made Tomo a bit angry. But Omachi explained she was investigating the organization behind these thieves. Simply put, she wanted to cast a wide net to catch a big fish to see where the protagonist would be sold. But now, that plan was ruined. After saying that, she told the two not to think about resisting, as their guard squad had received the sage's blessing. The system's power was ineffective against them. Just as she said this, the soldier beside her, named Zot, interrupted her. It turned out his appraisal skills showed neither of them had the system. Therefore, it was hard to confirm that these events were caused by the protagonist. The immediate crisis was thus averted. Seeing this, the protagonist no longer intended to act and simply asked if they could recommend a place for them to stay overnight. However, what he didn't know was that one of the thieves was actually not dead. That was the target on whom he had experimented with only killing the eyes. Not long after, Zot indeed found them lodging. But Tomo was truly surprised that the protagonist requested to separate rooms. Shouldn't he be a lecherous old man? Want to sleep together? This is a bit. Just as Tomo was feeling flustered, a ghost suddenly appeared right in front of her. But her first thought upon seeing the ghost was that it reminded her of her older sister. They looked exactly alike, as if cast from the same mold. Little did she know, this was very close to the answer. It turned out this ghost was the ancestor of her family, who appeared because she sensed Tomo was in danger. Upon hearing this, Tomo immediately bristled. If that's the case, why didn't you appear earlier? No sooner had these words left her lips than the ghost visibly weakened. It turned out she hadn't not wanted to appear earlier, but was afraid of being accidentally sent off by the protagonist. Because of this, she hoped Tomo could give the protagonist a heads up to avoid being instantly annihilated. The moment she appeared, Tomo couldn't believe the protagonist's ability was so terrifying. But overall, the supporter had arrived. The only thing that puzzled her was, if she had such a powerful protector, why didn't she have a system? Unexpectedly, this question, once spoken, clarified everything. It turned out the protective ghost, true to her name, could defend in spiritual and energetic aspects. Because of this, she had blocked Tomo's system. So, you're the one who caused me trouble. Why meddle in others' business like that? In truth, while the system was beneficial, accepting it also meant one's life would be controlled by the sages. In short, this action had actually saved Tomo's life. The ghost's true wish was to take Tomo back to her old world, no longer needing to rely on the protagonist. From now on, just relying on her would be enough. With that, she quickly planned Tomo's future. When she woke up the next day, Tomo was surprised that the protagonist had, on the contrary, already planned everything. At this moment, through the hotel receptionist, he had gathered quite a bit of information. Not only did he find the approximate location of their classmates, but he also secured transportation to get there, as well as an item to conceal their status. By the time Tomo snapped out of it, they were both on a train heading towards the royal capital. According to the information the protagonist found, their classmates seemed to be heading there, training as they traveled. Tomo couldn't believe the protagonist had accomplished so much in just one night. Just as she was feeling a sense of security, the protagonist unexpectedly pushed her down. Only when she came to her senses did she realize the train had been cut in half. At the same time, a group of guards was utterly astonished. It turned out that one of the thieves from yesterday had indeed survived. But upon waking, he was found to not only be insane, but also completely blind. Even healing magic was ineffective. The strange thing was, his appearance showed no signs of injury at all. After realizing the problem lay in his eyes, a sage decisively gouged out his eyes, then immediately used healing magic to restore them. However, the result was still useless. Even though the organs were regenerated, his eyesight was not restored. Realizing the issue, she then considered another possibility and immediately began a new experiment. It turned out the sage's ability was vampire noble, and she was of the highest rank. Any target she bit would directly transform into a bloodkin. their physical abilities skyrocketing like a rocket. However, what she didn't expect was that even after becoming a bloodkin, the situation didn't improve. In another development, our protagonist had gotten off the train. Hearing the announcement that a sage was battling invaders, the protagonist also stood aside to watch the show. Seeing the two fight neck and neck, with no clear victor in sight for a while, Tomo suggested, "Why don't we just take care of both of them?" Wow, it seems Tomo is even more killing intent than her guardian ghost. But Tomo's words also reminded him, seeing the opponent harming innocent people during their battle, about to reach their location, the protagonist no longer hesitated. Upon seeing a sage, one should kneel in gratitude. "You're the truly bothersome one." This scene immediately attracted the invader's attention. Seeing the protagonist staring intently at him, he quickly signaled that he had no ill will and wanted to negotiate. As long as the protagonist agreed to spare him, he would help him with something within his capabilities. Knowing the invader also came from another world, the protagonist directly asked if he could take him along. However, the invader refused without a moment's hesitation, simply because he couldn't bring his entire existence to this world intact. Moreover, he couldn't bring a dangerous existence like the protagonist along. However, as long as he had the protagonist's original world coordinates and a massive energy source, he could send the two of them back to their original world. After reaching an agreement, he quickly asked Tomo if she wanted anything. But before she could answer, the ghost said she had a proposal. It turned out that while on the train, Tomo had told the protagonist about the existence of his ancestor. Since then, he could naturally see her too. At the same time, in some corner of the other world, the sages were holding an online meeting. Upon hearing that a sage had been killed in the blink of an eye, Shin immediately denied the possibility that it was instant death magic. She knew the deceased sage very well. That person possessed extremely high death resistance. There was no doubt about it. The protagonist was just coincidentally present at the scene. She initially thought the red-haired sage called her for the invader issue, but it turned out to be just a trivial matter. Although she wouldn't interfere with the sage candidates in return, she would deal with the invader. Meanwhile, the protagonist had just parted ways with the invader. After completing the exchange with him, the ghost also got what she wanted. It was a weapon that could freely change shape for Tomo. Just then, the sword suddenly appeared inside Tomo's body. "Why did it come out of you?" "Because I materialized it into your clothes." This man possessed an extremely overpowered ability. If he wanted, all the beautiful girls in the world would willingly become his slaves. However, ironically, today he set his sights on the protagonist's companion. Without much ado, the protagonist, who could end all things, summarily dealt with his entire retinue. And following the source of that killing intent, the protagonist went straight to the mastermind. Immediately after, he uttered a single phrase, "Die," and instantly took the man's life from 1,000 miles away. The story began 2.5 days ago, when the protagonist and heroine traversed the forest and finally saw a human city. The heroine let out a sigh of relief, unaware that throughout their journey, the protagonist had silently eliminated countless people and magical beasts. The two arrived at a large, luxurious hotel, coincidentally encountering their former classmate who had abandoned them. He had left the main group to level up on his own. The two sides had barely exchanged a few words when his harem began to flare with jealousy. They were attendants he had carefully selected, and each of them showed immense hostility towards the heroine. It was only then that the protagonist belatedly realized this guy was one of those who had left them for dead. He just couldn't understand why this guy was so confident. What was even more absurd was that as soon as he opened his mouth, he demanded the heroine become his little lover. "Originally, I don't accept men, but considering we're old classmates, I can make an exception and let him be my slave." The protagonist couldn't believe such an eccentric person existed among his classmates. He even wondered if dealing with him might somehow taint his own ability. The reason this green-haired guy was so arrogant was entirely thanks to his dominator ability. In truth, when he first arrived in the other world, he was also very confused until he met a friend whose profession was an advisor. After being guided by that friend, the green-haired guy began to buy a large number of level 1 individuals, then turn the targets they defeated into his slaves. In this way, he gained an infinite amount of experience points. In other words, even if he just stood still, his level would continuously increase. He would become the strongest man in this world. The green-haired guy once again extended an invitation to the twin-tailed girl, but she unexpectedly rejected him outright without a second thought. Regarding this, he was not at all in a hurry. He believed that soon enough, the twin-tailed girl would come knocking on his door herself. When this charade ended, he returned to his room and fell asleep. Unexpectedly, a day passed peacefully until suddenly something happened in the city. A large number of sentient zombies began to continuously wreak havoc on the streets. Witnessing this scene, the twin-tailed girl quickly reported it to the protagonist. Unexpectedly, as soon as the protagonist stepped out of his room, he felt something lurking ahead. Then, through his perception ability, he discovered that the green-haired guy's subordinate was plotting something nefarious against his twin-tailed friend. So the protagonist, without thinking, activated his ability. In the very next second, the girl collapsed on the spot without any resistance. At the same time, the guy who was leveling up in the dungeon also learned that his subordinate had been killed. But before he could think it through, the dungeon's boss monster appeared right in front of them. So he had to temporarily set that aside to deal with the boss first. But witnessing the weak attacks of this boss, he lost all interest. Such trash. Immediately after, he stomped directly on the monster's head, turning it into his slave, then ordered the healer next to him to mend its wounds. Next, he ordered this boss to continue assaulting the dungeon. He opened his control panel to review the image of the blonde girl just before her death. But her death was truly strange. He completely didn't understand what had happened. But that didn't matter. After all, he still had a backup plan prepared. At the same time, a mysterious entity was also approaching Hanabusa City, and the red-haired sage, as the world's protector, naturally appeared to block the monster's path. However, this black monster was truly too abnormal. Her attacks were completely unable to cause it any damage. She could only watch it advance towards the city. It was at this very moment that the protagonist, just about to leave the hotel, was suddenly blocked by a mature woman. The woman lowered the magic staff in her hand, and the protagonist and his companion were instantly frozen solid. But before the woman could show off for long, the protagonist shattered the ice prison holding him with a single punch. Witnessing the scene, his twin-tailed friend thought this ice block was just for show. Little did she know that anything the protagonist wanted to kill, even ice, had no reason to exist. Seeing that the woman still wanted to resist, the protagonist first disabled her magic, then snapped the magic staff in half on the spot. Her weapon gone, Ziza no longer intended to fight. As much, she could only use magic sealed within a staff, therefore, she surely had more than just one staff. This girl was truly something. Her backup magic staff was hidden right between the hills. Stop staring. There's nothing shameful about admiring respectfully. Just as the protagonist was about to question her, a dark shadow suddenly appeared behind the two and attacked, unexpectedly. The heroine easily controlled the dark shadow with one hand. On closer inspection, the dark shadow turned out to be just a doll. Seeing reinforcements had arrived, Ziza thought she had the upper hand again. She pulled out the magic staff hidden in her hair tie to prepare a counterattack, only to be accidentally killed by the protagonist in the blink of an eye. Immediately after, all the dolls were also neatly dealt with by the protagonist. The purple-haired, twin-tailed girl was now completely terrified, begging for her life with tears in her eyes. Anyone who didn't know would think they were the bad guys. Please don't do anything too extreme to me. At the same time, at Yuki's location, he received a system message announcing that Ziza had been instantly annihilated. However, Yuki also used this opportunity to learn about the protagonist's ability to instantly kill all things. After such an absurd piece of information, how could he believe it? So he once again foolishly attacked the protagonist. And this time, what was deployed was an entire army of cockroaches covering the walls. Witnessing this scene, the twin-tailed girl froze in fear. Yet, faced with her plea for help, the protagonist also appeared very helpless. After all, killing these guys was certainly possible. But then how would they deal with all the corpses? Thinking of them falling like rain, the twin-tailed girl quickly rejected the protagonist's intention to act. However, the indifference of the two only made the green-haired guy even more arrogant. As a heavenly chosen child, he would not spare anyone who dared to oppose him. No sooner had the green-haired guy finished speaking than the cockroaches began to stir. Sensing the killing intent omnipresent, the protagonist finally had an opportunity to act. Following the source of this killing intent, the pink-haired girl also quickly cast healing magic on Yuki. But clearly, it was just a waste of magic. After seeing Yuki was completely beyond saving, the white-haired girl also knew she was free. She resolutely left the two of them and exited the dungeon. But when she reached the surface, she discovered the former forest had turned into a wasteland. Immediately after, she spotted the black monster behind her. Clearly, all of this was caused by it. And Sage Lin had also noticed the white-haired girl, very curious how she could have survived the black monster. So Lin directly used enthrallment magic to control the white-haired girl, intending to extract memories directly from her body. I am Sage Lin, a vampire noble of the highest rank. Become my kin and tell me all the information you know. Meanwhile, after leaving the hotel, the protagonist heard screams of despair everywhere outside. He thought this was some fantastical isekai world. How did it turn into a zombie apocalypse now? This vampire noble couldn't have imagined that she, who could regenerate fully even after turning to dust, would one day be killed by someone from 1,000 miles away. She had clearly researched the protagonist's instant death ability very thoroughly. First, the opponent could only kill people he had met before. Second, one must not reveal killing intent towards him, otherwise, no matter how far away, the protagonist's instant death ability could still be activated. So, as long as she didn't meet this protagonist, and launched a large-scale encirclement without any killing intent, she was confident that the protagonist's ability wouldn't be able to pinpoint her, thus indirectly causing her opponent's death. However, what she never expected was that the protagonist, by some unknown means, had instantaneously nullified all her attacks. Moreover, he even caused her main body in another dimension to die at the same time. What did you do to me? Hurry up? The thing is, just a moment ago, upon learning that the protagonist had an omnipotent instant death ability, to prevent this variable from disrupting the peace of the world, Sage Lin sent her trusted subordinate to turn half the residents of the town, where the protagonist was, into zombies. The reason for leaving half was to make it more effective. If the protagonist couldn't be brought to the plaza within a certain time, the remaining survivors would also turn into zombies. Before the protagonist could even understand what was happening, 3 people suddenly sought him out. Although he didn't want to kill innocent people, the protagonist warned the 3 not to get close to him, or they would die. However, the 3 completely ignored his words. Let me handle it. It was that simple and brutal. Thinking about it, continuing like this wasn't a solution. So the protagonist decided to go straight to the plaza. And as the mastermind of this incident, the red-haired guy's first reaction was that the protagonist had come here to surrender. just as he was still thinking that the protagonist came here to voluntarily sacrifice himself for the townspeople. Unexpectedly, the protagonist only came here to ask him to open the barriers sealing the city so he could take a train to the royal capital, and this action immediately enraged the red-haired guy. This was like him finally catching a criminal, only for the criminal to suddenly tell him to don't move, give me a car and let me go. What right did the protagonist have to make demands of him? But his words were also very reasonable to negotiate. One needed something to trade. Immediately, the protagonist thought of something. After declaring that if he let him go, the red-haired guy would be spared death. This left the red-haired guy speechless. In the very next second, he ordered his Immortal Legion to attack. The so-called Immortal Legion, as the name implied, was an army of the dead. This was his trump card against the protagonist. He didn't believe the protagonist could kill undead who were already dead. By the time he came to his senses, the ground was littered with corpses. The red-haired guy completely didn't understand why undead could die again. But the protagonist's answer was simple: as long as it's still moving, doesn't that mean it's still alive? However, the red-haired guy was now completely furious. In the very next second, he no longer cared about anything. He decided to unleash his full peak power to attack the protagonist. And upon witnessing the scene die, at least let me finish my transformation. After the red-haired guy died, only the man in the suit remained beside him. But he had no intention of attacking the protagonist. It turned out he was the mayor of this town, just forced to work under Sage Lin. However, neither the protagonist nor Tomo knew this name. Just as the two were about to ask more, the protagonist suddenly sensed killing intent nearby, approaching their location from different directions. Moreover, this time it wasn't zombies but living townspeople. This immediately made the mayor think of mind control. He could rely on the city's barrier for defense. Yet, his thoughts were still too naive. After trying, he found it completely ineffective. In this situation, he could only think of one person, Sage Lin, who was directly controlling the barrier. The white-haired girl, having become Lin's kin, was very worried for Lin. After all, her previous master had died precisely because he was targeted by killing intent. But Lin unexpectedly didn't care at all. Instead, she asked how terrifying the protagonist was in the girl's perception. After hearing the white-haired girl frankly state that he was above sages, sword saints, and even mythical creatures, Lin still didn't take it to heart at all. As long as I don't let the protagonist sense my killing intent, that's fine, right? And witnessing this scene, the protagonist had no saintly thoughts whatsoever. As long as someone attacked, he would directly activate his instant death ability die. Repeating this countless times, the protagonist wasn't tired yet, but Lin was. Thinking that continuing like this wasn't a solution, she decided to try a more elaborate plan. That was to launch a large-scale encirclement of the entire town where the protagonist was, without any killing intent. And to be safe, she used her clones to act. It turned out that as the highest-ranking immortal, she could not only regenerate from a single drop of blood, but also create countless clones, based on the same principle. But even so, she still didn't feel safe enough, afraid that the protagonist would still sense her killing intent. Therefore, she not only erased the clone's memories of the protagonist, but also slightly altered the large-scale encirclement she mentioned. That was to have the clones commit suicide in the town where the protagonist was. They just want to commit suicide, so there shouldn't be any problems, right? Just wait until darkness starts attacking. That's when the clones will make their move. It turned out that at this very moment, coincidentally, an invader named Darkness was passing through the protagonist's town. This was a type of monster that occasionally appeared in the other world. Even Lin had no way to deal with it. Anything it touched would instantly turn to stone. Before this, Lin had tried every method, though her regeneration speed was a bit faster. But she also had no way to destroy Darkness. If the protagonist could deal with it, what could be better? At the same time, our protagonist had also seen this monster. Although he felt that killing the opponent would cause something unpleasant if he left it alone, it would soon spread to their location. Thinking this, the protagonist no longer hesitated. Die. And after activating his instant death ability, the monster's movements paused for a beat. Yet at this very moment, a group of blazing red lights suddenly rained down from the sky. By the time everyone came to their senses, the entire city was in ruins. Are you alright? Just as Tomo thought the monster wasn't completely dead, the protagonist directly stated that the monster was dead. The one who launched the attack was someone else, and this person was very likely the Lin that the mayor mentioned. From the beginning, he had a feeling that the person targeting him was testing his ability. He had experienced this feeling in his old world. It was at this moment that Tomo looked closely, realizing the true nature of those red lights was a group of women in red dresses, falling from the sky. After realizing this was Lin's attack, the protagonist could only feel helpless. Since the opponent wasn't targeting him, he couldn't sense killing intent and thus couldn't automatically counterattack. If he actively activated his instant death ability, because of the opponent's extreme speed, they would have already committed suicide before he could act. If only Lin could directly attack here. How great would that be? Just as he said this, the mayor suddenly opened a 3D image. It turned out he was also a transmigrator, and his ability was to observe the entire city as its mayor. Lin's attacks, though random, did not strike the same location twice, and because of this, a pattern was created. According to his prediction, the next location would be the empty lot nearby. As mayor, he could instantly teleport anywhere he wished. Seeing the mayor willing to help, the protagonist devised a plan. That was to proactively go to the predicted location of the attack and endure it. And by intentionally generating killing intent, his instant death ability would automatically counter. Die. No sooner had the words left his lips than Lynn immediately felt something was wrong with her body. She not only felt that all the clones she created had died, but even her main bodies in other dimensions as well. But she could only think that far. Immediately after, she felt her vision darken, and her entire body gradually disintegrated. At the same time, in some corner of the other world, a girl sat up from inside a coffin. Just as she was curious about where this was, the crystal in her hand suddenly glowed. And immediately after, the image of a woman appeared. It turned out she had even prepared a backup plan. "When you see me, it means I am dead." She informed the girl that her true identity was a clone of herself. But the difference was, she inherited no memories, they were completely two different individuals. I've never seen a protagonist this overpowered. No matter if it's a legendary dragon or a high and mighty god, no matter how powerful, they can't withstand his two words. That day, seeing a wyvern blocking his path, so in the very next second, die. The protagonist didn't expect to be attacked by a flock of wyverns for no reason, just by passing through a canyon. But when he looked further, he saw even more. However, he wasn't scared at all. And seeing the opponent about to breathe fire without a word, if that's the case, then all of you die. The dragons fell as if sprayed with pesticide. However, the story didn't end there. One dragon gave him a feeling similar to a golden-scaled dragon, just as Tomo thought the protagonist would kill it too. Unexpectedly, this mighty being suddenly uttered, "You have passed." As Tomo was still dumbfounded, fortunately, the protagonist quickly called it back. If it could communicate, then it was a different story. After declaring that if it didn't stop, it would suffer the same fate as the other dragons. It turned out it could fly without flapping its wings. After the ground shook for a while, a girl appeared at that spot. This was a rather typical trope in isekai worlds. The protagonist was already used to magical beasts turning into human form, so it was nothing to him. After asking, he learned the reason they attacked was to test if everyone was worthy of meeting the Sword Saint. But the problem was, what the hell is a Sword Saint? And this question left the green-haired girl, Attila, frozen on the spot. After learning the protagonist was truly just passing by, she explained that the Sword Saint lived in this canyon and had the ability to grant systems to others. But hearing this, both the protagonist and Tomo wanted to turn and leave. After all, it was precisely because they didn't have a system that their classmates abandoned them after being transported, forcing them to explore this world together. Furthermore, the system itself was originally a trap. It wasn't until he learned that the Sword Saint was an existence comparable to a sage that the protagonist began to show interest. If this was true, perhaps it could help them return to their original world. Seeing the protagonist intended to agree, the green-haired girl, without hesitation, decided to get in their vehicle. She declared that as long as the two agreed to meet the Sword Saint, she would fulfill any request within her power. And so, guided by Attila, the group soon arrived at a bustling empty lot. It turned out that not only was the protagonist group here, but his appearance also caused a stir. They couldn't believe that coming by vehicle also counted. No sooner had someone claimed the protagonist was disqualified, than someone unexpectedly spoke up in his defense. It turned out this person was the Sword Saint. He stated that the method of arrival didn't matter. What mattered was the subsequent test. After noticing everyone had gathered sufficiently, he declared, "Starting now, everyone, massacre each other. If the number of people doesn't drop to less than half after 10 minutes, everyone will be disqualified." Though he didn't know what the hell was happening, his intuition told the protagonist he had been dragged into a troublesome situation. After he declared he was just passing by and asked if he could not participate, the Sword Saint was left speechless by the protagonist. If that's the case, then a new rule: if anyone tries to escape, everyone will be disqualified. With that, he told everyone to quickly make their move. Today, coincidentally, was the day for selecting the Holy King's envoy. Although he didn't know what this title truly meant, the protagonist truly had no intention of participating. It's just that even if he didn't want to, in such a chaotic battle, it would be hard to avoid getting caught in the crossfire. Just as the protagonist was about to deal with a few people first, a blonde boy unexpectedly stepped forward to help him. But it wasn't out of kindness, but because he believed this test wasn't about killing people. The Sword Saint's true intention was to reveal their true nature, to see if they could display behaviors befitting a Holy King's envoy. That's why this special trial was organized. Of course, there were also unexpected incidents during the process. The person the blonde boy could recognize had also been silently dealt with by the protagonist. Regarding this strange phenomenon, the blonde boy even thought it was the Sword Saint himself acting, and the reason was to punish those who didn't adhere to martial ethics. It was at this moment that a cry for help suddenly rang out. A man, sliced in half, told Tomo to pick up the 7-colored stone on the ground and place it in his hand. Though she didn't understand, Tomo complied, and the moment the purple-haired guy received the stone, in the next second, his body recovered as before. Tomo didn't understand what was happening, and at this moment, the Sword Saint also told everyone to stop and move to another location. It turned out, without knowing it, the casualties had already exceeded half. Seeing the protagonist had no intention of participating, Attila pleaded with him that if he passed, she would become his personal guard. The protagonist agreed. Of course, what he agreed to wasn't the latter part, but because he was already here anyway. He was starting to get interested in the title of Holy King's envoy. Before long, he had befriended the two people from earlier, asking what Holy King actually meant. Seeing the protagonist truly didn't know, the blonde boy didn't hide anything. It turned out the world was peaceful now because more than 1,000 years ago, the demon god was personally sealed by the Holy King. But the demon godskin, wanting to resurrect their master, had been secretly causing trouble everywhere. The Holy King's envoys were born for this reason. That was to deal with the demon godskin. At the same time, Tomo asked the purple-haired guy what the 7-colored stone from earlier was. The moment the question was asked, he revealed it was actually a consequence stone. All he had to do was apologize to it, and not only would his severe injuries heal in an instant, but for every 3 stones, he could participate in a prize draw again. It turns out this was no different from the system he received after transmigrating. The goddess had pitied him greatly in his past life, so she bestowed upon him consequence stones. With that, the purple-haired guy was about to demonstrate his prize draw system to everyone. Every hour, depending on the level of bad luck he experienced that day, he would receive new consequence stones. The world truly holds many strange things. Soon, the group arrived at the tower. Before Tomo could even take a good look, the guardian ghost urgently told her to leave immediately. The guardian ghost sensed an incredibly intense surge of dark energy in this place. Just as she finished speaking, the purple-haired guy suddenly vomited profusely. Seeing this, the guardian ghost bluntly stated that he had been affected by the dark energy. Tomo was unharmed because the guardian ghost was protecting her. As for the blonde guy, he already possessed enough resistance to withstand this level of dark energy. Fortunately, the purple-haired guy wasn't entirely helpless. The very next second, he used a consequence stone to recover instantly. He had used it to gain dark energy resistance. As for our protagonist, his situation was even more absurd. Not only did he appear completely unfazed, but he also wore an expression as if he had just finished something. And as if by coincidence, the guardian ghost then realized that the dark energy had suddenly vanished. But when Sword Saint urged them to hurry, she had no choice but to set aside her doubts. After entering the elevator, they quickly ascended to the top of the tower. At this moment, Sword Saint revealed that this was the place where the Saint King and the Demon God were sealed, and those within were their true forms. Since the Demon God couldn't be killed, the Saint King could only personally seal the evil. Time had forever stopped at that very moment. Just then, a clever-looking individual leaped out, declaring that all they needed to do now was kill the Demon God. The very next second, he used magic to attack the seal. As expected, an incident occurred. His magic, upon reaching the barrier, suddenly slowed to a snail's pace. It couldn't advance any further than the surface. At this, Sword Saint looked at him as if he were an idiot. It turned out the flow of time within the Demon God's sealing barrier was extremely slow. There was no telling when his attack would actually reach the Demon God. He then announced that the selection for Saint King's emissary had officially begun. Everyone must ascend from the top floor of this tower to the first floor within 24 hours. Of course, jumping from the building was out of the question, as they were required to collect 100 points inside the tower before arriving. Additionally, it should be noted that a few special participants would also be joining the selection, but those weren't the most important things. What worried Tomo was whether the protagonist's ability could kill the Demon God. Unexpectedly, the protagonist revealed an expression as if a burden had been lifted. It was just like when the dark energy had vanished. Actually, when the dark energy was very strong, I already tried to kill the Demon God. What did you say? This man has the power to end anything. Anything he wants to die will die instantly. All he needs is for you to generate killing intent towards him. And even if you're an adorable bunny, he'll send you to heaven without hesitation. However, even someone as overpowered as him can make unintended mistakes, simply because upon entering the barrier, he sensed an intense surge of dark energy and accidentally ended it. Unbeknownst to him, the Demon God was the very source of this dark energy. To avoid anyone discovering the anomaly, they quickly fled. By the time they entered the tower, casualties were countless. But thanks to those who went ahead, most of the monsters and traps had already been eliminated. Next, they just needed to be careful not to fall into any remaining traps. The words had barely left Lennon's lips when he stepped directly onto a trap, and was instantly pierced through the chest by a hidden weapon. He expressed extreme regret, clearly having been careful but being too unlucky. There was nothing he could do. Seeing this, Lianyan used a consequence stone to revive on the spot. To prevent any sudden situations, he directly held the stone in his hand as a precaution. Yet, as an unlucky person, he dared to lead the way. Not long after entering the room, a heart-wrenching scream echoed out. When they entered, they found a blue-haired girl guarding the entrance. Zik recognized the blue-haired girl at a glance to earn points. She had mercilessly killed everyone who entered the tower with her. This blue-haired girl was originally a Saint King's emissary, but due to carelessly killing too many people, she had her qualifications revoked. Fortunately, she was given another chance to participate in the challenge. She had strung steel wires everywhere, waiting for her prey to fall into the trap. Anyone who stepped in here would only find death. Seeing this, Zik told the others to find an opportunity to escape, while he would hold off the blue-haired girl. Hearing this, the blue-haired girl launched an attack with her steel wires. If a motley crew like you survive, it'll probably give the Saint King a headache. After all, only the strong can be Saint King's emissaries. This guy Zik is also an expert, like that woman Tayesa. He seems to be holding back while enjoying the fight. The protagonist nearby also noticed Lennon's severed arm. He thought that tying the consequence stone to his hand would guarantee absolute safety. But his arm was the first thing to be cut off. He had no choice but to place the stone in his other hand, and after reviving, everyone had reached the 98th floor. This floor was a safe zone. Everyone could choose to rest here. Seeing this, the protagonist suggested that everyone should split up, as the upcoming path might involve events requiring them to kill each other. That guy also knew the strength of the protagonist and his companion. so he took a step ahead to separate from the group. Lienium planned to rest here, waiting until late at night to replenish his consequence stones. But as luck would have it, there was only one room left in the safe zone. Tomo was initially worried that the protagonist might get ideas, so she quickly reminded him that the guardian ghost was still nearby. But Tomo had overthought things. After changing clothes, the protagonist immediately fell asleep. At the same time, at Lennon's location, after dying and resurrecting 15 times, he finally unlocked the function to replenish consequence stones late at night. The system notification popped up. Celebrating the 25th day of server launch, limited event guarantees a VIP draw, and receive 100 consequence stones. He thought his luck would soar, but after sacrificing a consequence stone, what he drew was actually a summon for his own goddess. Could it be that the prize draw even includes a goddess as a companion? The goddess explained that she was only here to check on his situation, and conveniently update his save point here. No matter how many times he died, he would resurrect in this spot. Who in their right mind would update a save point in such a dangerous place? The goddess's figure immediately vanished from sight. In another development within the tower, the white-haired girl looked at the control center with some doubt, because the number of deaths inside the tower and the number of souls didn't match at all. But Sword Saint Izabe didn't bother himself with it. As long as the necessary amount of souls for the barrier was sufficient, it was fine. At the same time, a transmigrator living a peaceful life in a parallel world welcomed an uninvited guest this morning. The moment he learned the stranger's purpose was to recruit him as a sage, the blonde guy wasted no words and immediately attacked. Yet, his attack was easily neutralized by the girl. Of course, he wasn't convinced and directly unleashed a chi blast towards the visitor. However, the other person used an identical technique to demonstrate to the blonde guy what it meant for. The copy to surpass the original. Just as the blonde guy was still bewildered, the other person darted behind him and slit his throat with a single knife stroke. Before the girl could even take a breath, her superior gave her a new assassination mission, and the target was our protagonist. Just as the girl was about to leave, the chubby friend whom the protagonist had once spared suddenly ran over. It turned out that after being exiled to the demonic forest by the protagonist, he was taken in as a subordinate by that blonde guy. Now that the blonde guy had been neatly dealt with, a mere sorcerer like him would only be waiting for death if he stayed here. Therefore, he hoped the girl could take him in and bring him along. She reluctantly agreed. Soon after, the two reached the outer perimeter of the trial area. They encountered a gigantic golden dragon guarding the place. Yet, facing annihilation by the colossal dragon, the girl remained incredibly calm. A dragon can't float in midair, right? It turns out the girl could negate objects based on her beliefs. For example, if she didn't believe a dragon could fly, that dragon would lose its ability to fly. However, this ability was quite hit or miss. It wasn't always 100% successful. Before the girl could finish her sentence, the colossal dragon used its two claws to climb back up. Suddenly, the dragon's neck was crushed by a spike sphere. The one who struck was the invader from another dimension. After the spike sphere finished reading the colossal dragon's memories, it ignored the two and flew straight towards the tower. Seeing this, the girl decided to follow and see what was happening. As soon as Tomo woke up, she found the protagonist sleeping with his head on her chest, and her face instantly turned beet red. Just then, Moko cried out for help. She was stuck to the wall, unable to move. Moko explained that after they had both fallen asleep, she had intended to discreetly disappear. But then she saw the protagonist suddenly hugging Tomo while sleeping. Finding it somewhat amusing, she decided to secretly watch for a bit, which resulted in her current predicament. The tower seemed to intend to gather all the souls and spirits of the deceased into one place. Walls and floors had a strong attraction for spirits, with just a slight carelessness. She got stuck all night. Just then, the protagonist also woke up. Moko immediately asked the protagonist if he had a solution. Seeing this, the protagonist touched the wall and locked onto the attraction as his target. His life snatcher ability activated, and Moko was finally able to break free. But she was still a little curious. Why would a tower need to collect the souls of the dead? Hearing this, the protagonist realized that this trial might have another purpose. He also hoped Tomo could mentally prepare herself, because he would act without hesitation against anyone they encountered next. Simply because everyone participating in this trial was filled with killing intent. There could be no doubt. He hoped Tomo wouldn't be too afraid of him. Tomo wondered why he was saying such things now. In her eyes, the protagonist using his ability was just like her taking action herself. She had thought so from the beginning. She also understood that the protagonist was doing it to protect her, while she herself was foolish enough to complain when being helped. Hearing these words, the protagonist's face flushed, and a flutter of emotion rose in his heart. Immediately after, the two continued into the tower. All mechanisms and puzzles along the way were completely dealt with by the protagonist. What they thought would be an easy passage, however, was suddenly interrupted by a man who appeared, declaring that cheating was not a good thing. He was the creator of the tower, and had been observing everyone's every move. He had racked his brain to come up with puzzles, only for the protagonist to bypass them all, which made him extremely uncomfortable. The protagonist explained that they just wanted to leave this place. The creator stated that this tower existed to maintain the demon god's sealing barrier, and if the protagonist destroyed it, there would be big trouble. The protagonist felt that letting them out should be enough. Unfortunately, the creator didn't quite trust the protagonist. He suspected that the protagonist had been manipulated by the demon god's kin. Hold on. He seems to be an important character. Anyone who showed killing intent towards the protagonist would absolutely not survive the next second. The two reached the next floor, which appeared to be a giant arena. At this moment, a bunny-eared girl was clashing with a swordsman. In their duel, the bunny-eared girl was always at a disadvantage. Just then, a voice from behind told the bunny-eared girl to fight properly. That guy's attack is nothing special. You can easily defeat him with your strength. Seeing this, the bunny-eared girl swung her great sword with surging momentum and charged forward. But her weapon seemed too heavy, causing her to miss her opponent every time she struck. Witnessing this scene, the man told the swordsman to show his true skill. Pretending in front of him is meaningless. Hearing this, the swordsman removed his hood, and his hair immediately turned white. This was the symbol of a half-demon. Before being discovered by the sword saint, he intended to deal with all of them in one go. Little did he know that compared to a great sword, the bunny-eared girl was even better at close combat. No longer restricted by her weapon, her movements became much swifter. Seeing that this would never end, the protagonist asked if they could pass first. Tomo was speechless. Didn't they see them fighting? Seeing this, the man didn't understand at all, but that was even better. He could just coincidentally offer both of their points to his disciple. The protagonist stated that fighting was useless. Their combined points were only 6. But the other guy didn't care much. With the protagonist and his companion, they could form a 3-on-3 team. If they could win, he would let the protagonist leave. If they lost, both the half-demon and Tomo would have to stay. But the protagonist wouldn't be so lucky, because in that guy's eyes, handsome men deserve to die. Die. So, can we pass now? Please wait a moment. They're dead. How is that possible? Just as the protagonist was about to leave, the white-haired half-demon from earlier suddenly called out to him. It turned out to be a girl. She introduced herself as Gia, on a journey to find her missing younger sister. She said a teammate had been taken to this tower, which was why she ended up here. After witnessing the protagonist's overwhelming power, she hoped he could help her find her sister. But that might make him and the Sword Saint enemies. The protagonist didn't care much. The tower's creator had already been dealt with by him. So confronting one more person made no difference. But he didn't like people relying on his strength. If it was just to go with her to find someone, it was fine. Immediately after, the group returned to the original square. Just then, the challenge time also ended. A total of 17 people on the scene had completed the challenge. Just as he was about to declare them Saint King's emissaries, a group of people hurriedly ran over to report that the tower had lost its response. Both the first and second barriers were showing signs of instability. The predicted time for the demon god's kin to break through the limits had changed. The words had barely faded when a violent tremor echoed from outside the tower, accompanied by an overwhelming surge of dark energy. What appeared before everyone's eyes was a 6-winged heavenly master. Seeing this, the Sword Saint immediately ordered everyone to prepare for a quick battle. This was also the duty of a Saint King's emissary. If he couldn't be defeated, humanity would face annihilation. A 6-winged battle master named Algan. He stated that if everyone would tell him how to remove the barrier, he would spare their lives. Otherwise, he wouldn't hesitate to kill every single person present. Witnessing the scene, a man who was very confident in his assassination abilities rushed forward in an instant. Unexpectedly, with just a flick of a hand, he was paralyzed by an electric shock. Even the girl who had initially launched an attack at the demon god followed closely behind. No longer restricted by the barrier, she could unleash her full power without holding back. The girl was completely stunned, never expecting her proud explosive magic to be easily blocked. The boy who just appeared, named Lut, said that even if hit by that magic, at most, it would only cause a burn. Feeling insulted, the girl swore and intended to teach the boy in front of her a lesson. However, unexpectedly, the opponent blocked her attack with just one finger. Even the arm she intended to attack him with had, at some unknown point, turned into the opponent's snack. At this moment, she finally understood how terrifyingly strong the opponent was. Seeing this, she charged at Lut, saying he would hold back the enemy while Lianyan took care of the girl. Although Lianyan was terrified, he agreed. He wondered if it was because his bad luck had been looked upon favorably by the goddess of fortune. A system notification then appeared. Catch roll again. VIP card guaranteed. Lianyan didn't hesitate to spend all his consequence stones. He hoped to get an item that could turn the tide. But looking at the light emanating before his eyes, he seemed to have a bad premonition. And the result was as expected. He once again summoned the goddess. At this point, Lianyan nearly snapped. This time it's for real, just you wait. Lianyan had thought he had victory secured, but unexpectedly, this goddess was part of the opposing faction. And what the goddess called cleaning everything up meant annihilating all of humanity. Hearing this, Lianyan was bewildered, unable to understand. At the same time, the protagonist had slipped away while they were fighting. Upon entering the tower, Sia immediately sensed her comrade's presence in a basement. But this staircase seemed to be connected to a spatial barrier, like something haunted. They kept going but saw no end. Tomo asked if they could just directly end the barrier, but the protagonist advised against it. To create such a barrier, there must be a very important facility ahead. It could also be a barrier created by Sia's comrades. The words had just left his lips when a loud noise echoed. The barrier suddenly shattered by something unknown. Before they could even wonder what had happened, a shadowy figure flashed past in an instant. Even the protagonist couldn't discern what it was. Only a monster, its entire body like blades, had shot out. It was at this moment that Sia sensed the presence of her brethren behind the door. When she opened the door, she was completely stunned. Her brethren before her had all been sealed inside a jar, seemingly drained of their magic to maintain the tower's barrier until they were utterly dry. Looking at the corpses before her, Sia was furious. At the same time, She breathed a sigh of relief that her younger sister wasn't among them. Although this thought made her feel a little ashamed, she swore she would avenge them. Sia decided to go back outside. From a young age, she had been taught to always repay debts. She absolutely had to kill the Sword Saint with her own hands. At the same time, outside the tower, facing the dire situation, the Sword Saint transferred his professional qualifications to Zik. As long as he died, Zik would automatically become the new generation Sword Saint. He prepared to use all the power contained within the tower to unleash his strongest attack. Hearing this, Lianyan felt a little regretful. He had intended to contribute some strength, but unexpectedly, the goddess was on the opposing side. Thinking that even if he died, he would just return to his save point, he decided to help the Sword Saint by asking the goddess why she could talk so happily with the enemy. The goddess originally didn't intend to tell Lianyan, but thanks to him, she was able to come here, so letting him die without knowing would be a bit regrettable. The goddess explained that the demon god at the center of the barrier was actually her husband. Because she didn't know where he had run off to and hadn't returned, she sent messengers to many worlds to search for his whereabouts. Soon after, she learned he had been sealed here. But after learning his whereabouts, things didn't go smoothly at all, no matter who she sent. They couldn't defeat that old Sword Saint. So she took a reverse approach, sending a top-tier unlucky person like him here. Who knows, he might be able to revive her beloved and bring about humanity's demise. Hearing this, Lianyan couldn't believe that someone as unlucky as him would one day be involved in the destruction of all humanity. Seeing that the barrier was about to be dispelled, he asked the goddess if they needed to wait any longer. To be sure, the goddess summoned a mirror to check. She didn't mean to look, but when she did, she was overjoyed. Not long ago, the barrier's creator was still alive and well, but in the blink of an eye, he was gone. If he were still here, the barrier could be repaired at any time. Even the one who could kill gods had been eliminated, so there was nothing left that could threaten her life. The goddess thought all of this was caused by Lennon's bad luck. Seeing this, Lianyan thought that if he just died, everything would end. But the goddess said that was useless because now, if he died, it would be a true death. The traveler on thin ice energy she had bestowed upon Lianyan had completely vanished. If you don't mind, you can witness my beloved's resurrection, and then die. With that, she pulled the barrier's core from thin air just by crushing it. The barrier would also dissipate. At this moment, the protagonist group also came out. Realizing the situation seemed to be worsening, it's time for my beloved to be resurrected. But to their surprise, the demon god had already been dead for ages. All of this was because the dark energy had entered the protagonist's body, causing him to reflexively end the demon god. Suddenly, Sia, who was nearby, saw the stunned Sword Saint and lunged to finish him off. If she missed this opportunity, killing him again would be extremely difficult. Meanwhile, the goddess, before she could even process the news of the demon god's death, was stabbed through the heart by the blade-covered invader. This was also what Tomo had seen in the basement, the thing that had destroyed the spatial barrier. After absorbing all the energy from the goddess's body, it left the scene. Seeing this, the boy Lut quickly ran to heal her wounds. However, the death of his beloved had completely transformed him. The demon god was a being who craved life sacrifices, so, if all of humanity were sacrificed, the demon god might be able to revive once more. Seeing the situation turn grim, the Saint King immediately deployed a barrier to protect them. However, the number of enemies was too great. Even if they wanted to leave, the opponents would surely not spare them. So he told Tomo and Jia to hold onto him, using the elegant excuse that it would be easier to protect them that way. This is clearly. She looks strange, doesn't she? The goddess had lost her mind. Wantonly rampaging. Not far away, a blue-haired girl led the chubby guy towards the tower, having received a message from Shin to come here and search for the protagonist's whereabouts. She asked Zik if he knew the protagonist, but it seemed now was not the right time. So Aoi activated her fate manipulation ability to understand the current situation. When the ability was activated, all of Zeke's data appeared as an information panel, and she also learned that he had just received the title of Sword Saint. She also told Zeke that if he struck the goddess with the holy sword in his hand, this battle could end. Although Zeke didn't understand how she knew the sword in his hand was the holy sword. If it could kill the goddess, he wouldn't hesitate to rush forward and finish her off. Seeing the attack stop, Aoi quickly spotted the protagonist figure. What level is that guy? Nothing at all. When the smoke cleared, Tomo also spotted the chubby friend whom the protagonist had once left behind in the forest. Seeing this, the chubby friend was scared stiff. The protagonist looked at Aoi, who was continuously vomiting. She seemed very unwell. Hearing this, Aoi quickly stated that she was perfectly fine. She said that she brought the chubby guy here because he was the protagonist's classmate. After completing her task, she said no more and quickly fled. Thus, only a few participants of the challenge remain alive. Zik immediately asked the protagonist who the girl next to him was. Although he had inherited the title of Sword Saint, why did she want to kill the previous Sword Saint? Seeing this, Sia stated that she was merely avenging her kin. The protagonist also told him to go down to the underground dungeon and see what cruel things the people there had experienced. If he still wanted to avenge the Sword Saint, then they would become enemies. Although Zik felt a little regretful saying this, someone with no power like her is no match for me at all. Seeing this, the Saint King stopped Zik, saying he couldn't win against him. After all, he was the one who could destroy the demon god, and even all of his kin had died by his hand. Realizing he had been discovered, the protagonist stated that he originally had no intention of interfering with this world's problems. He had merely accidentally killed him. Hearing this, Zik was completely speechless. To be able to easily kill the demon god who had pushed the entire world to the brink of destruction. What kind of being could do such a thing? And just like that, everything had come to an end. Everyone, for various reasons, headed towards the capital. After exchanging greetings, the group continued their journey to the royal capital, leaving the chubby friend behind. Unfortunately, he had caught the attention of the other surviving boy. At the same time, on some floating island, Shin also received news that Aoi had lost contact, understanding that the assassination mission against the protagonist might have failed. To clarify the protagonist's identity, she summoned someone familiar with him. He was one of the people who used to work at the research institute. Upon learning that he was summoned by Shin to another world to inquire about the protagonist's identity, the man was stunned, never expecting another world to actually exist. Could the source of the protagonist's power come from there? He didn't expect to actually see the protagonist's location and was very grateful to her for summoning him here. He truly was humanity's savior. He feared that the protagonist might accidentally destroy the old world. Before he could ask, he activated a self-destruct sequence targeting a class C entity. I don't want to die. This man had the ability to end anything since childhood. As long as someone had killing intent towards him, they would die on the spot without any warning. Despite being so powerful in his childhood, he could only live in a basement to be researched. The people who took care of his daily life often died within a month. To prevent the protagonist from being too lonely, they even invited a teacher for him. She was responsible for taking care of the protagonist's food, sleep, and rest, and also for shaping his correct worldview. Initially, after witnessing the protagonist's terrifying ability that could even kill ghosts, the teacher immediately submitted her resignation. But because the other party offered such a generous price, the teacher ultimately decided to stay. And so she stayed for a year. During that year, the protagonist also developed a deep affection for the teacher. The teacher seemed to have helped him understand the feeling of having a family member. For the first time, ironically, that precious bond turned her into a target, and she was brutally kidnapped by opposing forces. They wanted to find the protagonist's weakness, and then kill or seal him. Learning this news, the protagonist intended to go out and rescue her. Anyone who blocked his way out would die on the spot. Whether they saw him or not didn't matter, as long as the thought of stopping him rose. Their life force would be completely annihilated. Just kill him before he's seen, right? Even using hostages to threaten him was completely meaningless. He only needed one thought, and any living creature would fall asleep. Takato looked at the scene outside, knowing it was all caused by the protagonist. But she suppressed her fear and instead held his hand tighter. After the incident, Takato worried she would be punished. But her superiors didn't dare do anything to her at this moment, and moreover, they didn't want her to resign and leave. The key was that Takato no longer wanted to continue taking care of the protagonist, because she couldn't guarantee she would always stay there. But she also had no intention of quitting immediately. After all, if she left the protagonist alone, he might do even more absurd things. At the very least, she wanted to do her best to make the protagonist happy. Immediately after, Takato realized she had forgotten the most important thing, my valuable handbag. I forgot it. Those were also the childhood memories the protagonist recalled after falling back asleep. Soon after, they drove to the royal capital gates. But they seemed to have been deemed part of the opposing faction and were surrounded, simply because the car the protagonist group was driving belonged to an item of the Immortal Mechanical Legion. No matter how they explained, they couldn't dispel the suspicion of the guard squad. Seeing this, the protagonist hastily declared that they were Sage candidates summoned to the royal capital by Sage Shin to undertake a trial mission. After 2 seconds of inspection, the protagonist's information was found. But they believed that impersonating a Sage candidate wasn't impossible. The protagonist was speechless after hearing this. He took out the magic amulet Shin had given him. The very next second, all members of the guard squad simultaneously knelt, because what the protagonist held was an amulet inscribed with the imperial crest. They thought they could pass smoothly, but halfway there, someone jumped out to cause trouble. This blonde guy was also a member of the royal family. The amulet had the pieces of information. One was to prove they knew Zik. The other was to prove they were Saint King's emissaries. If they were Saint King's emissaries, they must surely possess the holy sword bestowed by the Sword Saint. But Tomo stated that after Zik became the Sword Saint, he didn't seem to give them the holy sword as proof. Hearing these words, David couldn't help but laugh. Zik becoming Sword Saint is truly the biggest joke in the world. If there was no way to prove their identity, then as a Saint King's emissary, he asked to witness their swordsmanship. If they lost to someone without even swordsmanship like him, then they couldn't be a Saint King's emissary. Seeing this, Tomo was about to just leave, but Moko encouraged Tomo to duel him, because she could tell that the blonde guy in front of them was useless. And even if she sensed danger, the protagonist would step in to help. Having no other choice, Tomo decided to take the risk. With a command, both sides immediately took their stances. The blonde guy's attack style belonged to the orthodox school, while Tomo's fighting style was an unconventional one that didn't follow martial ethics. Their method was shameless and insidious, using unexpected actions to deceive their opponent. While the opponent was focused on the weapon in her hand, her hidden left foot would slowly move to close the distance. At the same time, the sword she presented would continuously move in the opposite direction. After a series of these confusing movements in the opponent's eyes, Tomo seemed to have used some ground shrinking technique to appear directly behind him, then unleash a critical strike to his butt. Just like that, the two successfully entered the royal capital, and the blonde guy was tasked with guiding them. Although the victory was a bit dishonorable since he lost, there was nothing to excuse. At this moment, Tomo was a little confused why, After arriving in the royal capital, she saw fully armed people everywhere. The blonde guy explained that they were all adventurers, warriors specializing in challenging the demon realm. This was because a demon god was sealed beneath the royal capital, and his kin were constantly lurking for an opportunity to break out. Tomo was completely bewildered. Wasn't the demon god already eliminated in the canyon? The blonde guy also didn't understand this matter very well. After all, the Saint King's emissaries should know more about such things than them. Seeing this, the protagonist said that bringing them here was enough. The two of them would act on their own necks. After all, with him here, it wouldn't be convenient to discuss upcoming matters. Upon arriving at the royal capital, they would also meet their classmates, and they would need to find a plausible excuse for how they escaped by car. But that wasn't important. The protagonist asked Tomo if she wanted to forgive those people, because her leaving them behind was no different from murder. The two quickly arrived at the castle in the center of the royal capital. This was also their gathering place. Just then, the king came out, having learned from the sage that they were here as candidates. Just as the king was about to announce the second mission, he was interrupted by a mushroom-headed young man. The young man felt the king was too arrogant, looking down on everything. They were summoned here, not citizens of this country. The protagonist couldn't help but wonder how such an idiot, who couldn't read the situation, had survived. This woman couldn't believe it. Just a glance at the protagonist, and she couldn't control herself, dropping to her knees. This was because her eyes could see the fate value of all things in the world. However, where the protagonist's fate touched was a chaotic mess, like the end of all things disguised as a human walking among them. The feeling that just one more look would cause her to explode terrified her so much that she automatically gave up. All of this was because Sage Shin had unilaterally summoned Yogi-Ji to this world. This world would sooner or later be destroyed by the protagonist. In her eyes, the protagonist was fundamentally not human, not even considered a living creature. The sword on Aoi's back spoke up, saying that ever since she met the protagonist, she had become completely crazy. She thought that with Shin's arrival, there would be some change, but unexpectedly, behind the protagonist's harmless appearance there seemed to be a cold, insidious force manipulating everything. At the same time, inside the royal capital castle, the king stated that all they needed to do was conquer the underground demon realm and defeat the demon god. Then the sages would join them in achieving glorious feats, and they didn't need to worry about the severed finger. The royal family possessed the power to weaken blessings. As long as they left his side, the finger could be reattached. With those words, the king left the scene. Although the protagonist's goal was to come to the royal capital to find the sage, he didn't know what to do next. With a loud scream from Tomo, everyone simultaneously turned their heads. They couldn't believe they were still alive. However, 3 people were staring intently at the protagonist. Class President Yasaki then went straight to Yogi-Ji and Tomo, and began to justify abandoning them on the bus as a judgment based on the situation at the scene. After all, people without blessings only dragged them down. So, he didn't think his judgment was wrong. Although Tomo was very unhappy, on second thought, it didn't matter. After all, the protagonist only needed a single thought to deal with them. At the same time, Tomo explained to the protagonist that the pink-haired girl in front of them was Soja Akino. She was a very popular idol both at school and in the entertainment industry, and currently the class president of this group. She possessed the idol's blessing ability, which could make others take an oath, thereby strengthening the opponent's abilities through an oath skill. The protagonist then stated his ability was to end everything, and reintegrated into the class once more. But because the ability the protagonist spoke of was too alarming, he was assigned to a dormitory full of underachievers. His 2 roommates' abilities were even more useless. One was a chef who could make delicious food, and the other was a reader who could decipher any text. After everyone had introduced their abilities, a classmate with a life snatcher ability suddenly came to find them, saying he wanted to talk to the protagonist for a bit. In reality, he was also a member of the organization. His mission had always been to observe the protagonist every move. He was originally not allowed to approach or look directly at him. Immediately after, he gouged out his own eye. This was a prosthetic eye that the organization had implanted in his eye socket. It was an eye that could see through supernatural phenomena, but after coming here, it lost its power. Therefore, he no longer needed to obey the organization's orders and had come here to hand everything over to the protagonist before leaving. At the same time, Tomo also asked her roommate what a royal oil master was. The roommate said it was a very overpowered profession like him. There were also royal oil experts and royal oil masters. The 3 of them were even known as the Royal Oil Trinity. Among them, the chubby guy's ability was to freeze time. The 4-eyed guy's ability was X-ray vision, and the short guy's ability was tentacles. Each person's ability was more shameless than the last. Tomo also went to find the protagonist. After going outside, Ryoko suddenly knelt down and apologized to the protagonist. Actually, she and the blonde girl, Kuroi, also belonged to different organizations. The reason she had to apologize to the protagonist was out of fear that he might accidentally end them. The protagonist was speechless. It was as if he was the demon god, but it was clear they all knew about him. Hearing this, Kuroi stated that she came from an agency specializing in ninja combat or stealth. As for Ryoko, she belonged to the Research Institute, and Fukai, from earlier, belonged to the priesthood. All of them were sent to monitor the protagonist. The protagonist also gave up. He had already thought he would be monitored, but he didn't expect so many people. Or how about we find a way to go back together? That would be better. But the protagonist quickly refused, simply because the mission given to them by the sages was to achieve great feats. That was the only path. If they voiced different opinions, it would only cause chaos. Therefore, maintaining a state of mutual support was ideal. Immediately after, the group changed into their outfits and went to the dungeon, mainly to get acquainted with each other's fighting styles. As luck would have it, the person responsible for protecting them was Zik, whom they had parted with not long ago. However, low-level magic beasts were no concern for Ryoko and Kazoi. They easily cleared most of the magic beasts on the first basement floor. Immediately after, Akino told Tomo to try her hand. One looked like an idol, the other like a cheerleader, so it wasn't their turn to fight. Does martial arts even work on these things? Human-like targets shouldn't be a problem, right? Let's go for a big one, a long shot. The protagonist had also disguised himself as a master swordsman and entered the dungeon. Normally, monsters should die the moment they touch the protagonist, but the protagonist, through his ability to sense killing intent, successfully dodged that surge of killing intent. However, he only needed to walk along that straight path and point his sword, and the opponent would impale themselves on the sword and commit suicide. How did you do that? How could you dodge the opponent's attack? Just like that, through this maneuver, the protagonist successfully gained the class president's recognition. It turns out that when Sageland was still alive, he transformed many people into his vampire kin, and according to the rules, after she died, if these kin slaughtered each other until only one remained, that person would automatically become the successor to the true ancestor vampire. The white-haired girl was very lucky to be the second to last, because besides her, everyone else had been killed by the woman in front of her. But unexpectedly, at this crucial moment, that woman died on the spot in an inexplicable way. In a flash, a large amount of memories flooded the white-haired girl's mind. Just like that, she fortunately became the successor to the true ancestor vampire. Following the guidance of her memories, she quickly arrived at a place and discovered a little girl there. Although the opponent seemed innocent and adorable, just seeing the girl made her feel the suppression from her bloodline. Indeed, this was the true body that Sageland had left behind. Just as the white-haired girl could no longer remain calm elsewhere, the chubby friend and the demon god's kin had arrived at a tavern. It turned out that after parting ways with the protagonist, he was unfortunately captured by the opponent. The opponent's name was Lun. After telling Lud about the protagonist's life-snatcher ability, Lud also decided to take revenge. Of course, not by foolishly sacrificing himself. It turns out the demon god also had a younger sister even stronger than himself. She was sealed beneath the royal capital, and the chubby friend, as the one who understood the protagonist best, was captured by him to be his minion. Knowing that the chubby guy had an affinity for girls, Lut transformed into a girl to increase friendliness and went with the chubby guy to a tavern in the royal capital. This had always been a good place to gather information, but the prerequisite was to find the entrance to the demon realm to break the seal, to prevent the chubby guy from being discovered by his classmates. Lut also helped him cast the perception jamming skill. Hearing this, the chubby guy flashed an evil grin, intending to take advantage of this opportunity to do some bad things. At the same time, a shadowy figure flashed past, heading straight towards the Royal Oil Trinity. Good night. Seeing that the opponent was a girl, the bespectacled guy intended to activate his X-ray vision ability. However, the system displayed a warning about violating the oath, stating that he couldn't use his ability on a classmate. She was one of the classmates they had left behind on the bus, named Azaka. It turned out her true identity was a half-human, although she had been impaled through the stomach by the colossal dragon at the time. After the protagonist killed the dragon and left, she successfully recovered her wounds by eating the dragon's flesh. While the trio was still stunned, stop. This is my revenge. Starting today, I'll kill one person every day. Tell your classmates that I will mercilessly beat every single one of you to death, like a dead dog on the ground. The chubby guy didn't know she had died and come back to life. He thought she was furious because her classmates had left her behind on the bus. Just then, Shin herself arrived. She wanted to probe the chubby guy for information about the protagonist, but before she could even ask, the chubby guy immediately signaled that they still needed to investigate information about the demon realm. He intended to head straight there. Seeing this, Shin stated that she could tell them, but the prerequisite was that they needed to give her personal information about the protagonist, simply because she wanted to deal with this unstable source of trouble, the protagonist. Soon after exchanging information, Shin told them the entrance to the demon realm. Upon returning to the floating island, a subordinate reported that the sage candidates had conquered the 6th floor of the demon realm. It wouldn't be long before they could reach the 7th floor. Hearing this, Shin thought that the ease of conquest seemed concerning. She considered whether to increase the difficulty for them, but the subordinate didn't agree. Defeating the demon god himself was already an incredibly difficult task. The only thing to consider now was how to arrange the protagonist's position. Just then, a knock on the door sounded. Unexpectedly, the one who entered was class president Sasaki. Since this place was accessed through a teleportation gate, he tried using his problem-solving skill to get here. So, do you have something to say? We don't have much time left. Then let's do it. This man never would have thought that he, by merely accepting an assassination mission, would encounter a terrifying existence like the protagonist. Any creature that harbored killing intent towards him would be sent to heaven on the spot. Even a powerful divine beast like the phoenix couldn't withstand the protagonist to words die. Even if he summoned the peerless beauty queen Mingdo, the protagonist showed no mercy, die. However, just 2.5 minutes before, the leader of the assassin guild Shadow Garden had received an entrusted mission, requesting him to assassinate the protagonist. The letter of entrustment also stated that the protagonist possessed an absurdly powerful life snatcher ability, so he used a dummy to test it. Unexpectedly, the moment killing intent arose. The target was immediately counter-killed by the Life Snatcher ability. Next, he planned to target Tomo to test the protagonist's reaction. Unfortunately, the protagonist sensed the killing intent and timely protected Tomo. Meanwhile, the old man next to them was innocently caught in the crossfire. What he didn't expect was that the protagonist seemed to have discovered his location and said he would come find him. This scared him so much that he quickly flew his plane to escape. But just as it took off into the air, the engine was immediately destroyed by the protagonist. "If you run, I'll kill you. If you're not running, it means you know about my ability, right?" Faced with the protagonist's question, he immediately broke out in a cold sweat. He had originally intended to buy time to find an opportunity to kill the protagonist. Unexpectedly, the spirit body he sent out was captured so easily. What made him even more disbelieving was that the item in Moko's hand was actually the spirit princess, the leader of the spirits, captured so easily. Even the spirit king met a tragic fate. Seeing this, the leader immediately summoned the divine beast Phoenix to attack the protagonist. But even a divine beast couldn't withstand the protagonist to words. Unwilling to give up, he once again summoned Queen Mingdo, who possessed power equivalent to the demon god. She possessed the power to bestow a peaceful death upon all living things on earth. But even if the opponent was a peerless beauty, the protagonist did not hesitate to eliminate her. Die. This time, the leader was utterly desperate. Just then, a girl attacked the protagonist to protect her master. For some reason, the Life Snatcher ability wasn't activated this time. The ability wasn't activated because Yogi-G was a little stunned. He didn't expect that even in another world, he could still meet an old acquaintance. Enzu switched to manager command mode. Little did he know that the girl in front of him was actually a robot, though he didn't know why she was created by the people here. To save his own life, the leader confessed everything. But the protagonist had no intention of sparing his opponent, simply because he possessed skills that could create objects from the old world. So, as long as he was alive, he could create as many robot clones as he wanted. Therefore, the only outcome could be death. After returning to his dormitory, the protagonist explained to Tomo that the girl in front of them was a childhood friend he used to play with named Enzu. But the one lying on the bed was a robot created based on Enzu's prototype. It seemed to have been created to take his life. If possible, she still hoped that she could rest in eternal peace. Hearing Tomo's words, he felt a little sad. Realizing that something was off with the atmosphere, the protagonist asked, "Did you think she was dead? She's probably on the bed eating chips right now, right?" Tomo was speechless after hearing this. Just a moment ago, she was making a sorrowful face, talking about eternal rest. In reality, the protagonist was referring to the robot in front of them. If there was a robot exactly like oneself in a place one didn't know about, being used by others without permission, wouldn't that be very pitiful? But Tomo felt that as long as the other party was alive, it was good. If they were dead and still being used by others, it would certainly be unbearable. The protagonist's classmate had secretly colluded with the sages, plotting to kill the protagonist. But before doing so, the protagonist's classmate was hunted down first, and the one chasing him was the girl who, along with the protagonist, had been left behind on the bus. Attacking her classmate was an act of revenge. The girl named Azaka easily knocked out her classmate with a single move. However, the classmate was completely unconvinced. After all, he was currently suppressed by royal bloodline, unable to use his full power. Hearing this, Azaka decided to temporarily spare the boy, intending to kill the king first. After releasing the boy from the seal, she would make him die willingly. Immediately after, Azaka went straight to the palace and found the king preparing to sleep with the queen. The king didn't expect anyone to be so bold and intended to finish off Azaka on the spot. However, Azaka had swallowed the colossal dragon. Not only did she have super high defense, but she also had super offensive power. With just one move, she counter-killed, finishing off the king. Azaka never expected this king to be so weak. After confirming with the queen that it was indeed the king, Azaka went straight to the hospital to find her classmate who was recovering. When Azaka had killed the king to break the seal, there was no longer a seal. "Watch me kill you. Aren't you here to kill me? Quickly, up here, dragon tail, now to crush you." In a flash. It was the second day. Akino had some unpleasant news to announce to everyone. In just one night, 8 people in the current class had died at Azaka's hands. And Azaka was the girl from the first episode, whom her classmates had used their abilities to empower, was left on the bus and died. What she never expected was that she herself was an artificial human. Remembering how she was treated as a tool and abandoned on the bus for not awakening her power, she swore revenge for the humiliation. When she arrived in the royal capital, the first thing she did was beat one of the 3 members of the royal oil trio to death. Since then, classmates have been continuously killed. And because of this, the kingdom demanded that they leave. Their reasoning was that if this continued, the country would soon be destroyed. So, to quickly become sages, the group once again ventured into the lower levels of the demon realm. Just defeating the demon god would grant them the title of sage. But when they reached the 6th level, over 5,000 demons were waiting for them. Seeing this, the class president immediately organized their formation for an attack. At the same time, the chubby guy, along with the demon god's retainer, found the demon god's sister in the basement. And the demon god's sister was a true Brokon. Just imagining it was enough for her to create countless children with her brother. Giving birth through imagination, it's truly defying all common sense. The retainer then gave the chubby guy the key to unseal the demon god's sister, saying that with this item, he would be considered the demon god's representative. so the demon god's sister wouldn't kill him. The reason she gave him the key was because she knew she didn't have much longer to live. But it's okay. Actually, this journey with you wasn't so bad. Bell was speechless. He never expected love to come so suddenly, and Jardy was too impulsive. Soon after, the two arrived at the demon god's sister's location. The retainer also revealed that the demon god had died. However, the demon god's sister wasn't surprised after all. She knew her brother wasn't strong enough to be immortal. But before avenging her brother, she had something more important to do. I don't quite understand what you mean. This is traces of brother's essence, so I'll take it. This item can be used as an intermediary to revive my brother. Huff huff. She laughed and panted. Give me your brain too. You surely remember my brother's heroic face, then. The demon god's sister threatened the chubby guy. If he didn't want the retainer to die, he should use the key to open the seal. Hearing this, the chubby guy hastily and obediently complied, placing the key into the lock. Meanwhile, Azaka began her revenge against her classmates. However, this time her arm was severed by a blade. I thought dragon scales could resist all damage. I'm a chef, after all. It's not strange for me to be able to slice and mince ingredients. You just revealed your ability like that, aren't you being a bit too reckless? Dragon scales. Ha, my slice was beautiful, wasn't it? This is also a chef's skill. Chefs have to cook many dishes at once, so it makes sense to be able to create clones, right? I know the position of every ingredient like the back of my hand. Azaka unleashed a merciless inferno, incinerating the chef. And so, with the combined efforts of Azaka and the protagonist, the number of classmates quickly dwindled to just 18. Thus, the remaining survivors, eager to leave, began to accelerate their assault on the dungeon. With everyone's effort, they quickly cleared the 6th floor. They were only one floor away from the 7th, where the demon god's sister resided. Everyone planned to rest for the night first. But that evening, as the protagonist walked alone outside, the blonde guy, as if possessed, suddenly walked past him. Sensing something strange, the protagonist quickly followed. The result was finding the blonde guy about to jump off a cliff and commit suicide. So the protagonist quickly tackled him to the ground. Just as the protagonist wondered what was wrong with the blonde guy, the ground suddenly shook violently. Xian had also found the classmates in the stronghold, telling them that her challenge might have been a bit too simple. At this rate, she couldn't create sages, so she decided to speed things up a bit. And the method was for everyone present to slaughter each other until only one remained. But it was at this moment that the girl responsible for monitoring the protagonist suddenly discovered that his ability had been upgraded to level 2. This guy's amazing. This man has the power to end anything. Anything he wants dead will die instantly. Even a Sanus with the power of the cat god, if she just intends to kill him. Even in a different dimension, she cannot resist his ability to steal life. However, another person with a similar life-stealing ability was still miles apart from the protagonist. Because Sage Shin felt the challenge was too simple, she announced a new mission, requiring all students to slaughter each other, and the last one standing would become the new sage. Don't even think about escaping. An hour after the challenge begins, she will kill anyone who hasn't killed others. Hearing this, Fakai, who also had a life-stealing ability, looked displeased. Having just barely escaped the protagonist's death threat, he wouldn't meekly let others dictate his fate. Seeing this, Shin just smiled and said that while the power would also affect her, if he found a way to kill her, the challenge would end right there. Elsewhere, our protagonist suddenly fell from a great height. If he fell like this, he'd surely be splattered. Kill my kinetic energy. How can something so logically illogical happen? The protagonist looked at his surroundings, seemingly having unexpectedly arrived at the deepest level of the demon realm, the 7th floor. And not far away, the chubby guy had unsealed the demon god's sister. At this very moment, Mana, the sister, couldn't help but feel overjoyed, because she felt that with the seal broken, her brother had allowed her to roam the world. Seeing his mission completed, the chubby guy also prepared to leave the place. Only, after walking for a while, he realized something was wrong. The floor had become sticky and difficult to walk on. Seeing this, Lutz revealed that Mana's body was rapidly expanding, seemingly preparing to give birth to her own brother. If this continues, we'll all be swallowed by her. Lutz, covered in injuries, was just a burden, and also knew that the chubby guy knew a shortcut out of the demon realm. So, to avoid implicating the chubby guy, Lutz kicked him away. Unable to escape, Lutz ultimately became nutrients for Mana. Seeing this, the chubby guy didn't even think twice and quickly fled. At the same time, the protagonist and Tomo were on the phone. He had learned about the challenge mission Shin had just announced and told her to contact him. If there was any danger, the chubby guy frantically ran out. The moment he saw the protagonist, he felt like he had found a lifeline. He immediately knelt down in reverse, because the protagonist had once said that if they met again, he would kill him. But in the current situation, he could only beg him for help, because whatever was behind him wouldn't stop chasing him for some reason. Next, the chubby guy was asked to take him back to the 6th floor. Hearing this, the chubby guy, of course, gladly agreed, and the protagonist no longer had to worry about his life here. At this moment, on her journey to rescue her kin, the white-haired girl finally reunited with her lost younger sister. Her younger sister had become the new true ancestor of the vampires. Together they headed to the royal capital to find the protagonist. They just didn't know if the protagonist was there. The elder sister reassured her younger sister, saying that the protagonist had once said he would come to the capital. In another distant location, the students were beginning their survival battle royale. The blonde boy with the text prophecy ability was able to know what was about to happen. After learning he was about to be riddled with bullets, he could even avoid the event by modifying the text in the prophecy. After entering, the two immediately engaged in a fight, but it was Azaka who had entered. Seeing this, the blonde guy quickly fled to the metal doors separating the 6th and 7th floors. Just as he was about to leave, the doors suddenly opened automatically, and the text prophecy appeared. It said the protagonist and the chubby guy would appear on the other side of the door. I'm dead. What is this? I'm lost. I've turned to nothingness. My vital functions have stopped. Why is this happening? Anyone who intends to kill him simply won't survive to the 2nd episode. Immediately after, he tried to contact Tomo to ascertain her location, but she didn't answer. It was at this moment that the chubby guy also discovered a system notification that he seemed to have been listed as a candidate for stage selection. Participants were required to fight until only one survivor remained. Seeing this, the protagonist felt, isn't this just a perfect? As long as the chubby guy escaped the selection, Shin would definitely come looking for him. She could use her holy water to eradicate all demons. Just as she was chatting with the cat god in her mind, a voice interrupted her. I can't believe someone dares to brazenly sleep in my territory. No sooner had the words left her mouth than the bed beneath her suddenly vanished, replaced by the giant rocks falling on her. The man in glasses noticed the commotion and thought he had easily dealt with it. Little did he know, the Sanus suddenly appeared behind him. The two were stunned by the information. The Sanus's power was supposed to only destroy demons. Seeing this, the blonde guy immediately cast spatial teleportation. His profession as a delivery person allowed him to teleport. However, the teleported lava could not harm her. The Sanus also explained that any attack was ineffective against her. Hearing this, the two immediately froze. Witnessing this scene, the Sanus couldn't help but feel joyful, because she loved seeing those who were overly confident in their own strength. When they witness someone stronger than themselves. I guess it's my turn, huh? Sanus's holy strike. What kind of power is this? Little did she know that the day before, on her way home from school in the other world, she had stumbled upon two cats fighting. What was even more preposterous was that the two cats were using superpowers to duel. Coincidentally, she herself was accidentally killed by a cat firing a laser. But not long after, they revived her and, as an apology, allowed her to communicate with the cat gods to borrow their power. Although her strength seemed capable of killing Shin. But if she just killed her, she wouldn't be able to enjoy such interesting activities anymore. This is a rare opportunity. Just kill this guy. At the same time, Diamond, who was the chubby guy? Just as he approached, the Sanus appeared right before them. Did you come here to attack us? Sanus's punch. Little did he know, besides his life-stealing ability, the protagonist had also learned a few close combat moves from Yuko. Faced with the unexpected, the Sanus was somewhat flustered, because in that punch, the white cat god had strangely died. Seeing this, the black cat god, utterly enraged, transferred all its power to the Sanus. I won't hold back anymore, disappear, all of you. Elsewhere, Tomo saw the fierce battle in the stronghold and thought she could avoid them there. Right? Little did she know, Moko sensed someone controlling a spirit body approaching her. Looking closely, it was surprisingly her friend Zamako from before, who was very good at miscalculation. Tomo wondered, isn't her ability miscalculation? Hearing this, Yumiko also revealed that her true ability was spirit summoning, allowing her to control spirits to serve her. For example, the princess of an ancient race next to her. How is this possible? I want one too. But how can someone with a funny name like Miyuko be so different? The Dana clan is also a prestigious family. I was originally a princess, besides. What's wrong with the name Moko? The reason her surface ability was miscalculation was precisely the ability of the princess before them. But it was regrettably useless, so she specifically sought out Tomo, planning to steal Miyuko. No sooner had she spoken than Moko was suddenly pulled by a force, uncontrollably merging into Zamiko. Before Tomo could even wonder, Yumiko unexpectedly attacked Tomo, but with Moko's power, she had become incomparably strong. If hit, even if not killed, you'd be crippled. Tomo was also speechless, her own guardian ghost turning against her. Forcibly possessed, she could only become strength for the opponent. Immediately after, she removed Tomo's combat attire, because maintaining this attire entirely relied on Moko's power. Close your eyes. I'll kill your eyes without a word. My eyes, my eyes. The protagonist, given a significant hint, draped his heavy coat over Tomo. From the opponent's voice, he also realized Moko seemed to have been replaced. If that's the case, then just kill her. Domiko also realized the spirit seemed very afraid of the protagonist. It was at this very moment that a voice rang out. You who crave power. The power of a spirit summoner is not just at this level. Could this be the awakening of a sage? Seeing her close friend die right before her eyes, while a little sad, it was her own doing. Hearing this, the chubby guy looked displeased, as the main female character. Shouldn't you have a little more compassion? Hearing this, Tomo was also speechless. I'm not the Sanus. She also curiously asked the chubby guy why he was there. Coincidentally, the chubby guy had also been included in the selection, planning to use him as bait to lure Shin here and kill her. At the same time, the girl who had initially fought Azaka was now on the defensive. No matter what weapon she summoned, she couldn't defeat Azaka. After all, I probably won't survive anyway. The beloved class president was betrayed, and the former general and class president gathered people to besiege her. But she showed no panic at all. Immediately after, a circle of her loyal fans appeared around her, and each devoted fan would self-destruct to attack. As an idol to protect her, self-destruct is only natural. Very quickly, the general was also taken out by the self-destructing fans. But before the idol could rejoice for long, the girls of the scene were surrounded by slime in the forest. The man in glasses saw the situation was dire and revealed his trump card, transforming into a birdman with no intention of saving anyone. Elsewhere, when the protagonist and Tomo arrived at the battlefield, Ryoko and Kazui suddenly appear before them. They had been waiting for the protagonist's arrival, believing that if they could cooperate with him, everything would be resolved. Just as he was asking the protagonist what he planned to do next, a strong wave of killing intent suddenly spread from afar. Everyone, get behind me. This man has the power to end anything. Anything he wants dead will die instantly. This life-stealing ability not only works on living beings, but even offensive magic used against him can be killed. Moreover, as long as someone intends to kill him, no matter how far they run, it's useless. The life-stealing ability, once targeted, will hit. It will traverse endless space, and even time to certainly kill the person. Not even a demon god capable of destroying the world is an exception. They simply cannot survive in front of him for more than 0.5 seconds. Just now, the shooter girl sacrificed all her strength to create an energy bomb, intending to use a nuclear explosion to annihilate herself and Azaka. It was at that very moment that a strange black and red aura of death spread around. The protagonist immediately sensed something was wrong and quickly told everyone to hide behind him. Unexpectedly, a mushroom cloud rose in the sky. After the explosion passed, the surroundings were devastated, as if they were in an apocalyptic disaster. But none of them were injured at all. After all, with the second gate opened, even the laws of physics could be punished by the protagonist, having narrowly survived. The chubby guy suddenly noticed a group of soldiers approaching them not far away. Looking closely, they all resembled Azaka. Little did he know that in the previous explosion, Azaka, being a robot, had 60% of her body destroyed. At this point, the AI medical system presented two choices: 1. Wait for natural recovery, or 2. Use dragon scales for complete recovery. But the cost would be the inability to maintain a human form. Hearing these words, Azaka didn't hesitate at all to use the dragon scales, because she still had to find her classmates for revenge. Even transforming into a dragon was a small price to pay. She wouldn't stop until all the students were confirmed dead. Originally, the sage had forbidden the use of reconnaissance skills, but in her dragon form, she possessed a special ability. She could use her shed teeth to summon countless dragon-tooth soldiers to search for and battle the surviving students. Only, by sheer coincidence, she had just summoned them when they encountered the protagonist group. Then perhaps her dragon life has reached its end. 5 survivors detected. Kill them. What happened? Nothing surprising, just another mass execution. What's going on? Why did the peaceful surroundings suddenly get covered in slime? However, when the AI system locked onto the protagonist, it was no longer calm. Because this robot Azaka was originally created to cope with the worst-case scenario of the protagonist destroying humanity. If it weren't for the protagonist, the new generation human protection plan would not have been activated. This kind of plague god from different dimensions must absolutely not be provoked. When encountering him, the only way is to flee. Hearing the AI's words, Azaka was not at all pleased. She didn't mind transforming into this form, all to continue avenging her classmates. Now that the target was right before her, how could she retreat? Tomo looked at the approaching flying dragon with some curiosity. It seemed identical to the one that attacked them when they first arrived in this world. Same type. Even the way it dies is exactly the same. Die. The flying dragon crashed to the ground and died. The personality unit has disappeared. But Tomo didn't understand. Azaka had clearly been dead for a long time, so why was she here? Completely clueless about what was happening, the chubby guy only felt immense fear. If they wanted to use him to draw out Sage Shin, they had to leave quickly. No sooner had he spoken than Shin suddenly appeared beside them. She looked at the protagonist figure with some suspicion. According to her memory, she had sent people to deal with him, hadn't she? However, before she could finish her sentence, her legs suddenly lost all sensation. Because the protagonist had waited so hard for her to come to his doorstep, he basically didn't want to talk much with her, so he directly ended her legs. This would make it easier to interrogate her for the necessary information. Seeing this, Shin tried to use magic to blow off the protagonist's head, but the protagonist, with a single thought, killed the magic itself. Killing parts of the body already takes a lot of mental effort. Can you please stop doing stupid things? Absolutely do not think about using any lethal magic on him. The protagonist only wanted to know how to return to his original world. After all, they were all summoned by Shin, so she was most likely to know the method. If she didn't tell him, it was fine. He would slowly kill Shin until she decided to speak. No sooner had he spoken than Shin's finger, which she intended to cast a spell with, was killed once again. This time she was truly terrified, quickly using teleportation magic to escape the scene. But she didn't know that no matter how far she ran, it was useless. Even resurrection or regeneration couldn't save the parts the protagonist had killed. What the hell is this ability? I don't understand at all. Before you speak, I will slowly kill you. Stop joking around. You're going to kill me anyway, so how can I possibly tell you? Her lover ran in, and before he could even ask about her in the next second, his legs were also ended by the protagonist. Shin, in despair, turned back to the protagonist and pleaded. The protagonist said that as long as she revealed the information, he would not attack again. After everything that had just happened, she must have known that no matter where she was, the protagonist could attack at any time. He could even attack targets she was only looking at. Her friends, hearing this, all felt a chill down their spines. Luckily, they had all built a good relationship with the protagonist. But Shin said she was truly powerless. This time, she really hadn't prepared a method for them to return. But the chubby guy had clearly been to this world once before, so there had to be a way back. Hearing this, Shin explained that the chubby guy could return because he still maintained a connection to his original world. But those summoned, like them, did not have this connected state, because if they were still connected to their original world, they wouldn't be able to unleash their full power in this world. Currently, the only way was to gather energy, and then use coordinates to return to their original world. Moko could remember the coordinates. As for solving the energy problem, Shin took out a crystal from her body. It was the source of the sage's immortality. The sage stone could be used as energy to activate the coordinates, but at least 8 more were needed to return. Each sage possessed 1 sage stone, including the 2 sages the protagonist had killed earlier. However, if the protagonist killed them, the stone within their body would also lose its power. Seeing that Shin had entrusted everything to him, the protagonist spared her. Then he told the chubby guy to lead the way, preparing to leave the area. Xian never expected the protagonist to actually keep his word and spare her, so she planned to go back and save her lover. But no sooner had she flown up than an unknown liquid substance surged from the ground and attacked her. Seeing this, Shin casually dealt with it. Although curious about what had happened, saving her lover was the most important thing right now. However, in the next second, she froze. Her teleportation ability had failed. The system suddenly displayed a teleportation weight limit notification. Immediately after, she discovered that her lower body was held fast by the liquid. It was at this moment that the surroundings suddenly changed, and the demon god suddenly manifested, because this place was a world created from her body. Noticing an abnormality in her immune system, she came to investigate, and unexpectedly encountered a small fly that called herself a sage. It was only then that Shin realized the person before her was the demon god, who governed the demon realm. Before, she had felt the challenge for the students was a bit too simple, never imagining the demon god would be so powerful. But her system to the demon god was nothing more than child's play. All abilities became ineffective in an instant, and even a sage could only become food for the demon god. In her final moments, she screamed the protagonist's name. At the same time, the chubby guy had led the protagonist back to the surface via a shortcut, and immediately noticed the Grand Archbishop in front of them, rejoicing over the demon god's resurrection. However, the protagonist didn't even let him finish his sentence before ending him with one move. The chubby guy was filled with indignation. Don't just kill side characters randomly like that. What if we miss an important plot point? Tomo unconsciously felt that her role as the complaint specialist was about to be replaced. At this moment, the ground was covered by the demon god's liquid. A large amount of liquid broke through the capital's barrier and continuously overflowed outside. Witnessing this scene, the chubby guy froze in fear. The chubby guy explained that this was the demon god, originally from the deepest level of the demon realm. He had only unsealed her to protect himself. His previous frantic escapes were also because of this. At this moment, the demon god also recognized the chubby guy. She was very curious about who the protagonist Shin had mentioned before dying was, completely unaware that the living, breathing plague lord was right before her eyes. Thinking that the culprit who killed her brother was the protagonist, the demon god reached out her hand, intending to finish him. But clearly, all she could do was melt on the spot. Please, just die. But even after killing the demon god, the entire capital was completely covered in liquid, and there seemed to be no way out. Seeing this, the blonde guy said he had a way. So he led the protagonist to the rooftop, where there happened to be a train, but it was limited to only carrying 5 people. Seeing this, Moko said she had a solution. Let them take the train, so the others successfully left, leaving only the protagonist and the female lead in their own world. Now that we're stuck here, what do we do? It's fine, it's simple. I've already started researching this before. This can actually fly. Theoretically, yes. As expected of Moko, the best supporter. Just like that, the group successfully arrived outside the city for reunion. Only the chubby guy once again ran away on his own, his whereabouts unknown. After 2.5 minutes of discussion, the 2 girls decided to go with the protagonist. But the protagonist said he had only prepared enough energy for the people to return. It was at this moment that a carriage stopped beside them. A pink-haired girl named Lei suddenly appeared and shouted, "Hi, Marianne." It turned out this pink-haired girl was also a sage, and she even offered her sage stone immediately upon meeting him, only hoping the protagonist would listen to her wish. And so, the group set off once again. On Tomo's lap pillow, the protagonist fell into a dream. In his dream, he recalled his teacher's words. The protagonist only needed to use his power as he wished, but she hoped the protagonist would follow his own will, not be bound by the will of others. In those warm memories, the first season of the story about the life-stealing ability also came to an end.